home alone. It's supposed to be a time of freedom, of peace. But what if your house wasn't the safe haven you thought it was? What if, in the stillness of night, something or someone was lurking just beyond your sight? In this episode, we'll explore terrifying true stories of people who were home alone, only to encounter something that would haunt them forever. Stay tuned, because after tonight, you might never look at being home alone the same way again. But before we get lost in the shadows, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out our chilling upcoming episodes. If you're enjoying our eerie stories, leave a like, drop a comment, and share the terror with others. And for even more eerie content, follow us on social media. Keep the fear alive. Thanks for joining me on this spooky journey. Now, let's dive into the nightmare. I'll never forget the night I was home alone for the first time. I was 18, fresh out of high school, and my parents had gone away for the weekend. It was supposed to be a fun, carefree time, a weekend of relaxation. But that night, it turned into something I wish I could erase from my memory. It all started out so normal. I had a quiet evening planned. I made myself dinner, watched a couple of episodes of a show I was into, and then just lounged around in my room, scrolling on my phone. Around 11:30 p.m. I decided to call it a night and started getting ready for bed. The house was still and quiet. A bit too quiet, but that's normal when you're home alone. I'd already turned off the downstairs lights and was about to head upstairs when I heard something strange. A faint knock. It wasn't at the door. It came from inside the house, from somewhere downstairs. I froze, heart pounding. My first thought was that it was the wind or the house settling. But the knock came again, louder this time. It wasn't a typical sound either. It sounded like something solid hitting the wall, not a knock on the door. I stood still, listening. It didn't happen again, so I convinced myself it was nothing. I tried to calm myself, even laughing at how jumpy I was. "It's just your mind playing tricks," I whispered to myself. I was about to go to bed again when I heard another noise, this time a scraping sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. It was coming from the living room. My mind raced through possibilities. A burglar? No, the windows were all locked. Maybe an animal got inside, like a raccoon or something. But the house was pretty secure, and I was sure I'd heard the noise coming from the inside, not from an open window. I grabbed my phone and dialed my best friend, but there was no answer. She had been out with her family for the night and wasn't home either. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. Then I heard footsteps. Not the kind of creaks that come with the house settling, but the distinct sound of footsteps pacing back and forth downstairs. I wasn't sure if I should call the police or investigate myself. I didn't want to seem like a scared teenager, but something in my gut told me this wasn't just my imagination running wild. Slowly, I grabbed the baseball bat from under my bed, trying to steady my breath. I wasn't going to just sit there. I crept down the stairs as quietly as I could, clutching the bat, trying not to make a sound. I reached the bottom of the stairs and peeked around the corner into the living room. The room was dark, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. But what I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the center of the living room, was a figure. It wasn't clearly visible, but I could make out a silhouette. The figure was standing very still, almost as if waiting for something. I couldn't see the details clearly. Was it a person? Was it a shadow? I didn't know, but what struck me was how unnatural the figure looked. Its proportions were wrong, its posture contorted in a way that seemed wrong. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there. staring at the figure, hoping it would go away. Then the figure suddenly jerked its head toward me. It wasn't a smooth movement. It was like it snapped into place way too fast, too sharp. The face I saw, if you could even call it a face, was pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to reflect the darkness of the room. I screamed and ran back up the stairs, slamming the door behind me. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it would burst. I locked the door, grabbed my phone, and dialed 911, but the call wouldn't go through. The signal was completely lost. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to explain what I had just seen. My instincts told me to get out of the house, but I didn't know where to go. The only option I could think of was to hide. I crawled under my bed, clutching the bat, and tried to stay as still and silent as possible. I heard footsteps coming up the stairs, slow, deliberate. The figure was walking toward my room. The sound of each step made my blood run cold. Then I heard it stop, right outside my door. I held my breath. A long pause. Then a voice that wasn't human. It was a low, guttural whisper, like the sound of something scraping against stone. "I know you're in there." My blood ran ice cold. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just waited, hoping whatever it was would go away. Minutes felt like hours. Eventually the steps faded, the whispering stopped. I waited for what felt like an eternity, before slowly, cautiously, I peeked out from under the bed. The door was still shut. The house was eerily quiet again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I stayed in my room, too terrified to move, too scared to make a sound. When morning finally came, I immediately called my parents and begged them to come home early. They thought I was being dramatic, but when they arrived, we checked the house. There was nothing. No signs of forced entry, no trace of anything that had happened, but I knew what I had seen. I'll never forget it. To this day, I don't sleep well when I'm alone. And whenever I hear a knock on the wall or a scraping sound, I feel the fear crawl back up my spine. I still don't know what it was that night, but I'm never home alone anymore. I was 22 when this happened, and it was the first time I'd ever stayed alone in my parents' house for an extended period. They had gone out of town for the weekend, leaving me to take care of the place. I'd been living on my own for a couple of years, so being home alone didn't really bother me, but something about that weekend was different. It was a Friday night. I had the house all to myself, and it felt unusually quiet. The kind of silence where every little creak or rustle of a leaf outside your window seems amplified. After dinner, I settled in for the night. I was on the couch watching TV with my dog, Max, curled up next to me. He's a big golden retriever, always been a bit of a nervous dog, so when he started to act a little strange, I figured it was nothing. But then, I heard it. A faint knock. At first, I thought I imagined it. The sound came from the front door, but it was too light to be anything solid, almost like someone was tapping the door with their fingernails. It was odd, but I assumed it was just the wind. My parents' house was old, and the wind always made strange noises at night. Max perked up, his ears twitching. I dismissed it and continued watching TV, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. But then the knock came again, this time louder. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't expecting anyone. My parents had locked all the doors before leaving, and I knew they'd be gone for hours. I reluctantly stood up and peeked through the window by the door. No one. I couldn't see anything or anyone out of place. I felt a little ridiculous, but I locked the door and went back to the couch. Max had settled down again, but he kept looking toward the hallway, his eyes wide. That's when I noticed something strange. The hallway light was on. I was sure I had turned it off earlier in the evening. It was too late for that light to be on, especially since no one had gone up the stairs since my parents left. My pulse quickened. I tried to convince myself that maybe I had left it on without realizing, but something in my gut told me otherwise. I grabbed my phone, thinking I might call my parents or a friend, just to calm my nerves. As I dialed, I heard another noise, this time footsteps. Slow, deliberate steps coming from the top of the stairs. I froze. Max was staring into the darkness at the foot of the stairs, growling softly. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I got up cautiously, phone still in hand, trying to make sense of what was happening. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was my imagination. But the steps didn't stop. They continued, slowly descending. It was too late for anyone else to be there, and I was sure no one else had keys to the house. My pulse was racing. I didn't know what to do. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, phone still in my hand. The footsteps stopped just above me, and I could hear shallow breathing. It was almost like someone was waiting. I did the only thing I could think of. I bolted out of the house. I left the door wide open as I ran to my neighbor's house, my heart pounding in my chest. My neighbor was confused when I explained what was happening, but I didn't care. I just needed to be somewhere safe. When we went back to my house with a flashlight, we searched the whole place. We found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no sign of anyone being in the house at all. The door was still wide open, just like I left it. Max was hiding under the table, shaking. I don't know what I heard that night or what I felt. Maybe it was just my imagination, but I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps, the breath in the dark, or the feeling that someone or something was waiting upstairs. To this day, I don't like staying home alone at night. Whenever I visit my parents, I still double-check the locks and leave the lights on. I haven't told anyone else the full story because I'm not sure they'd believe me. But I know what I heard, and I'll never ignore that feeling again. I've always prided myself on being independent. My parents were going out of town for a long weekend, and I was more than capable of handling a few days alone in the house. It was an old, creaky home, but I loved it, filled with old furniture, family photos, and that comforting smell of wood and dust that only older houses seem to have. It was quiet, safe. At least that's what I thought. It started innocently enough. Friday evening, I grabbed a pizza, put on a movie, and settled in for a relaxing night. My dog Ellie curled up next to me on the couch, and everything seemed perfectly normal. The house was eerily quiet, but I was used to it. Nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. By the time I decided to go to bed, the clock had already struck 2 a.m. The night was unusually still. I turned off the lights in the living room, checked all the doors, and made my way upstairs to my room. That's when it happened. As I passed the hallway mirror near the stairs, I saw something out of the corner of my eye. For just a split second, I thought I saw a figure standing behind me in the reflection, tall, dark, and unfamiliar. I froze. I turned around immediately, expecting to see someone in the hallway, but it was empty, just the usual paintings on the walls and the shadows of furniture. I even glanced into the rooms nearby, but nothing. I felt stupid. Of course I was tired. I was just seeing things. So I shrugged it off, went to my room, and locked the door behind me. I wasn't scared, not exactly, just uneasy. Ellie was already lying on the floor, curled up and fast asleep. I climbed into bed, trying to shake off the weird feeling that had crept in. I don't know how long I'd been lying there, trying to fall asleep, when I heard it. A faint, scratching sound. It was coming from the direction of the hallway just outside my room. It sounded like fingernails lightly scraping the wood floor. I sat up in bed, straining to hear. The scratching continued for a few seconds before it stopped. I was wide awake now, heart pounding in my chest. Maybe it was just the house settling, I thought, but it didn't sound like that. It didn't sound like a normal noise. I turned on the lamp beside my bed and tried to convince myself it was nothing. But then Ellie let out a low growl, her eyes wide open, staring at the door. My breath caught in my throat. She never growled unless something was wrong. I got out of bed and slowly crept over to the door, my hand resting on the doorknob. I opened it just a crack. The hallway was empty, but the air felt cold. The lights were off except for the dim glow coming from the street lamp outside. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The hallway mirror, the same one I had passed earlier, was reflecting something strange. It was me, standing there in the doorway, but there was something wrong. My reflection was smiling, a wide, unnerving grin that I wasn't making. I stumbled backward, my heart racing. I slammed the door shut and locked it again. My breath was coming in short gasps. There was no way it was my imagination. I knew what I had seen. For the next few hours I stayed in my room, barely moving, afraid to make a sound. I could hear the faint sound of scratching again, this time from the opposite direction, closer to the stairs. It didn't stop. The next morning, I left the house as quickly as I could, grabbing Ellie and going straight to a friend's place. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been in the house with me, something that shouldn't have been there. When my parents returned, I told them what happened, but they just laughed it off. Probably just your imagination, my mom said, and you've always had an overactive imagination. But I knew what I saw, I know what I felt. That night, I wasn't alone. Something was in that house with me, something that watched me in the mirrors and followed me through the halls. I never stayed the night there alone again. And even now, I can't look at a mirror the same way. It was a typical Friday night when everything changed. My parents were rushing out to the hospital after they got the call. My older brother had been hit by a car while riding his bike. I was 10 at the time, and my younger sister, Mia, was only 5. With my parents in a panic, they left me in charge of her, which was both a huge responsibility and, at that moment, an overwhelming burden. I remember the urgency in my parents' voices as they rushed out the door. They didn't even have time to tell me where the phone numbers were or how to reach them in case anything happened. I was left standing there, my sister clutching onto my leg as the door slammed behind them. The weight of the house felt heavier, the quiet almost suffocating. Trying to distract myself from the flood of thoughts racing through my head, I sat down on the couch and picked up my game controller. But even as the TV flickered to life, I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts were consumed by my brother. How badly hurt was he? What if something happened to him? The ticking of the clock on the wall felt louder than ever, echoing in the emptiness. My little sister was playing quietly beside me, but her presence only seemed to heighten the tension. What if something happened to us too? Hours passed, and the anxiety only grew. It was nearly midnight, and the house had grown eerily still. That's when I heard it. A soft creak, then another, the front door. My heart sank. We always locked it. Did I forget? I glanced at Mia, who was still absorbed in her toys, unaware of the dread creeping up my spine. The house felt different. Not just quiet, but unnervingly quiet. Something didn't feel right. I slowly stood up, heart pounding in my chest, and moved cautiously toward the hallway. I peeked around the corner, half expecting to see someone standing there, but there was nothing. Just the faint light from the street lamp outside, filtering through the blinds. Then the door creaked again. It was louder this time. Panic hit me in an instant. I grabbed Mia by the hand and pulled her toward the closet in my room. my mind racing. Should I call the police? What if someone was already inside? I didn't know what to do, but I knew we needed to hide. I shoved her into the small closet, trying to keep my breathing steady as I crouched down beside her, holding my hand over her mouth. I could hear the footsteps now. Slow, deliberate, the sound of boots scraping against the floor. My heart pounded in my chest as I forced myself to remain silent, praying the sound wouldn't lead whoever was in the house straight to us. The door to my room swung open. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to control my breathing. I felt Mia's little hand tremble in mine, and I tightened my grip on her. The intruders were here, and there was nothing I could do to protect us. The footsteps stopped. I held my breath, too terrified to move. There was no sound now, just the distant hum of the fridge from downstairs. Time stretched, unbearable, until finally the closet door cracked open. My stomach dropped. The figure loomed in the doorway. I couldn't make out their face, but the silhouette was unmistakably human. The air in the closet felt thick with fear, and for a moment I thought they were going to find us. But then, after what felt like an eternity, the figure pulled back. A voice, low and menacing, whispered just outside the closet door. "Stay quiet and you'll be fine." The silence stretched on and the footsteps retreated. I didn't dare move for what felt like hours. My mind raced. Why had they left us alone? Was it a mistake? Did they even know we were in here? After what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of the front door opening again, followed by the rush of feet outside. The intruders were gone. I waited, breathless, until I heard my parents' voices in the driveway. I cautiously opened the closet door and rushed to the front door. I flung it open to meet them, feeling an overwhelming rush of relief flood over me. But when we went inside, everything was different. The house was a mess. Drawers pulled out, cupboards open, furniture shifted. It was clear they'd been looking for something. My heart pounded as I tried to make sense of it all. Why had they left without taking anything? Why had they spared us? My parents had no idea what happened. They were too preoccupied with my brother's condition, which thankfully wasn't as serious as we'd feared. But for me, the nightmare of that night lingered long after. In the weeks that followed, my parents installed an alarm system, replaced the locks, and reinforced the doors. But the damage had already been done. I couldn't stop replaying that night in my head. The figures in the dark, the whispers, the moment the door swung open, and I was certain it was the end. I still don't know who they were or why they spared us. Maybe they never intended to hurt us, or maybe it was just luck that we survived. But what haunts me the most is the question I can never answer. What if they hadn't left? I've never felt safe in that house again, and even now, whenever I'm alone at night, I can't help but listen for the sound of the door creaking open again. Have you ever faced something truly terrifying? Eerie Shadows wants to hear your story. Share your chilling experiences with us on Reddit, and together we'll uncover the eerie mysteries lurking in the shadows. If you'd like to support the channel and help us create even more terrifying content, consider checking out our Patreon or Ko-fi. Your support helps us keep the horror alive. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more bone-chilling tales like this one. Stay tuned for the next eerie episode